Okay, so hey guys, and welcome back to another predictions video, and in today's video I'm going to be predicting the Azim versus Lipinets fight. And so if you are new around here and you haven't yet subscribed, please do so, like the video if you do indeed like the video, and let's get straight into it. So this is I suppose on paper, an Azim step up. This is him getting to that kind of fringe world level in which every fighter, realistically, if they are going to be able to get to a world title, have to be able to kind of beat these gatekeeper type fighters, which are typically, you have to go through one or two of them to be able to get to that world title. But Lipinets, I think, is a good start. To be completely honest, Lipinets is coming off an excellent win himself. I'll speak about that in just a second. But yeah, I think for the most part, this is going to be an interesting event, and Azim headlining yet again, which I'll touch upon in my thoughts on that in just a moment. But yeah, so we'll give a little kind of overview of the fight. And so Azim is 12-0 with 9 KOs, and Lipinets is 18-3-1 with 13 KOs. This fight is for the vacant IBO World Super Lightweight title. Azim's last fight was a win via KO in round 8 versus Davies, and Lipinets' last fight was a win via unanimous decision versus Davies Jr. This is in Azim's home country of England. Lipinets is 35 and Azim is 22. Lipinets' losses have come versus Garcia in 2018, Ennis in 2021, and Rivera in 2023. And to speak a bit more about what I've just been saying, like I said, he's coming off an excellent victory himself, Lipinets. I think this is perhaps showing that he still has got left a bit more left to give in his career, if not perhaps a lot more. If he is still able to get a big win here against Azim, then it's a huge win, and he's really elevated himself back into world title contention, or them top fights in which he has been in the past. And so he, like I say, is coming off I suppose also at the same time, a fight of the year contender against Robbie Davies Jr. I'm surprised that it wasn't kind of put up for any kind of nominees in the Ring Magazine Award, because it was an excellent fight. I believe both fighters dropped twice. Lipinets hurt in the earlier rounds, and yeah, there was just an insane fight, to be completely honest. And Davies Jr. obviously has had some ups and downs in his career. He had, I believe, was coming off that fight versus Dara Foley, which was a bad kind of leg break or ankle break, and so he definitely perhaps wasn't in the best of shapes, but still he gave it his all, showed what he could. But Lipinets showed that his world class level wasn't just going to bow down to somebody who wasn't able to get to that. So that's what I think makes such a good kind of world title gatekeeper type fighter. You have to be able to show that you are still able to beat guys if they are not world title ready. And when it gets to the point where you can't do that and you're losing to lesser opponents who clearly aren't quite ready for that world title, then you have to look at your career and be like, maybe this is time for me to retire. And Lipinets at 35 years of age, if he is to lose against Adam Azim, not to say that he's not world title ready, this Adam Azim has looked electric so far and realistically has been looking like he's destined for a world title. But if he is to lose at this point in his career against an opponent who hasn't got that same kind of name, I suppose, yet at the moment outside of the UK, I feel like it could be maybe detrimental for his career, and it shows that perhaps we're not too sure how much he's kind of got left to give. And himself, Azim, is coming off a win versus O'Hara Davies, where O'Hara retired after that fight. And I think Azim perhaps might have been a little bit frustrated with how it turned out after the fight, because obviously he looked amazing in the fight and he just stopped Davies without pretty much any problems, and it was an excellent victory for himself. But to Davies, as he has been throughout his whole career, has been outspoken, and he was very outspoken when he retired. He had a lot to say, was in pretty much every single one of Azim's victory interviews, and kind of to an extent kind of took away the win from him, and perhaps that might have annoyed Azim a bit. Perhaps it may have made him think that, this is his time, he needs to get given this recognition, he's not going to let anybody else steal it from him anymore. I don't know necessarily if that's his mindset or not, but like I say, it's definitely a big chance to put on again another big statement victory, and this time now for that IBO World title. Like I mentioned, the world titles in which I've been talking about are the kind of the main four, but this one is still an excellent belt to pick up along the way, and a lot of fighters, to be fair, don't go this route and kind of skip along it. And in a division, in the super lightweight division, which is an amazing division realistically, some of the best names around as champions, and also loads of excellent contenders, plus multiple great contenders coming out to the UK as well. You kind of have to look at it and be like, he has a world title here. It's not, like I say, one of the big ones, but it's still a world title. And when you compare it to the other British names that are, you know, in these kind of world rankings around it, you look at Harlem Eubank, you look at Dalton Smith, and you look at Jack Catterall. None of them have gotten this IBO title, and so yeah, like I mentioned, it could be something in which maybe he can hold above that of any of them other guys. And recently, just this last weekend, we've seen Dalton Smith pick up the European title as another title, and he's been sought after as the belt collector, and that's been his kind of branding from that last performance. And he's doing excellent to pick up all the titles, but perhaps you would argue that this is an interesting debate, I suppose. The European title may mean lesser than that of an IBO World title. Like I say, I mean, the level of opposition that Dalton Smith fought versus Wilder Dweezer, him as a fighter, he was clearly outmatched, outskilled by that of Dalton Smith, and so it shows that the European level perhaps to an extent maybe isn't that high, but I've also seen some excellent European level fights as well. So then you look at this, it's the same thing with the IBO. There's been some IBO fights where I've looked at it and gone, this guy's a bit of an unknown, he's really not that high skilled, and then the other person has clearly shown why they're the A side and why they're so dominant. But then other times you've seen some excellent IBO world title fights as well. So yeah, it works both ways, and so I feel like that's an interesting debate to have. Is winning an IBO world title more credibility than that of winning a European title? And I mean, Azim went on Twitter and said that he was kind of embarrassed to be watching Dalton Smith's fight, and kind of he basically said, "Is this a European level title fight that he's watching?" And that it was kind of embarrassing, to be completely honest. And I mean, like I say, he was completely outskilled Walid Weezer, and so perhaps, like I say, he's got full right, but he's really going to have to put on a performance here, and against an opponent who, like I mentioned, is coming off an excellent victory himself, and has shown he can still operate at a very high level. And to speak a little bit about boxer, 2025 arguably could be a bad year for boxer. In the first kind of argument section, the first part of the year might be excellent. They've just signed with Conor Benn for that Chris Eubank fight. That's an excellent fight. If money wise, that's going to bring in loads and loads of money. Then Ben Whittaker might hopefully fight Liam Cameron again. If not, he'll probably fight somebody else and probably get quite a bit of money after that. And Azim versus Lipinets. But when you kind of move along, they've got some excellent women's fighters, but some of the men's fighters, that they aren't quite, sensational level as of yet. Azim's one of their biggest names, Whittaker is one of their biggest names, and Chris Eubank's one of their biggest names. They've recently kind of lost out a little bit on Chris Billum Smith because he had that loss versus Ramirez. He has kind of time to regain himself in a fight that he's fighting on the Eubank Ben undercard. But like I say, they have been Richard Riakporhe. I mean, still we don't know what's happening with him. Lawrence Okoli's left, so they have Joshua Boazzi as well, who's a great name to have. But it could be a rocky 2025 latter period depending on results. Obviously, Chris Eubank versus Conor Benn is a very close fight on paper, and you got to think it probably will be a 50-50. And you want to see, boxers putting in their guys with 50-50 fights. They haven't been doing so for quite a while, but just like I say, could be detrimental because they don't have that many star names yet. So, like I said, that could be bad if Chris Eubank Jr. loses to Conor Benn. Obviously, they've said to be a rematch clause, so we'll probably see two fights no matter what, so I suppose that's not too bad. But Ben Whittaker, he could arguably still lose versus Liam Cameron, and if he doesn't take the Liam Cameron fight and he goes down a different route and perhaps goes for a bit of an easier opponent next, then that's really kind of lowering his stock and putting them back a bit. You look at, other names as well. Adam Azim, he obviously, if he wins this one, he'll probably go on to these tougher tests as of next, and he might get matched up against like a Dalton Smith or somebody like that. That's been talked about a lot. Perhaps that might not happen, but it could. And if it does, then that could be a very tough night's work, and he could possibly lose that one as well. Same with Joshua Buatsi versus Callum Smith. That could be a very tough night. He could lose that one. Martin Piccoli is a name in which have been not really mentioned. He's got F.A. Jagba as a fight, and he definitely could be overlooking that fight. And so you've kind of got them, what, 5 big names around for a boxer at the moment. They could go, and if any of them go, then kind of the winning records in which they're having and the winning streaks in which they're on, if any of them lose, I think that could be detrimental to boxer, to be completely honest. And that's just, like I say, my opinion. It could be a bad start, a bad kind of mid-part year for boxer, but we will have to wait and see. Um, you know, Perhaps they've been forced to move things along with their fighters because of the embarrassment of not doing that. Ben Shalom has received a lot of backlash, like I said, in the past for not moving their fighters along enough, and there could be a bit of embarrassment behind it, and so now they're really trying to, like I say, move things along a bit and actually progress fighters in their right route without taking a bit too long to do so. And Azim's only had 12 fights, and to be fighting at this level, Dalton Smith, who is, like I say, calling him out and everything, and has been in previous fights, has fought more times. So you got to think that maybe they haven't been, holding their fighters back, but they have been continuously pulling them out of purse bids. Seems like I say, they're not going to be pulling them out as many purse bids. There's been a few still which have been, back and forth and actually haven't happened, but now it seems like the fights are actually going to be able to happen. And is that down to possibly embarrassment from boxers' side? Just kind of fed up of it and have been backed into a corner and basically been forced to put these matchups together. But yeah, like I said, carrying on speaking about Adam Azim as a fighter, I think boxer are keen to really progress him along and keeping him going as a main event because, I mean, like I mentioned, there's them 5 big names: Bacoli, Eubank Jr., Boatsi, and Whittaker are all fighting on Riyadh season shows. So they've kind of only really got Adam Azim and Callum Simpson, who is another name, who's not really quite at that kind of star level as of yet, but is got a big fan base, is getting built up. They are the kind of main fighters that are main eventing actual boxer events, bar on the women's side. So, like I said, there isn't that many fighters that are actually able to main event boxer events anymore, unless they start bringing in other guys to do so and feel like they have enough time to, push another fighter to go and do that. And I don't think Azim is that big of a ticket seller, to be completely honest. I mean, I was at his fight versus Petit Jean, and he obviously won. He looked excellent in that fight, and has been looking excellent in every fight. But they put him on before Tyler Denny, who was another name, but Tyler Denny has lost and hasn't been rumoured to fight anybody since then, really. And so, even though he was said to headline Azim that card, they then put Tyler Denny on because he had more of an audience. Obviously, it was in Wolverhampton, but also at the same time, it didn't seem like in that last fight versus Davies, Azim was selling that well. And so, like I said, that's just an interesting thing I wanted to pick up on. I mean, Azim himself has said that he's wanting to learn more English or wanting to improve on his English. Perhaps, I respect him a lot for doing that. A lot of boxers are awful speakers, awful talkers. You get them on the mic and they're just fumbling and they don't know what to say. And if you're willing to give the time to really learn your English and you are progressing as a fighter at the same time looking excellent, you can become more entertaining. You can call fighters out in better fashion. You've got to think Chris Eubank Jr., Senior, was one of the best speakers on the mic because of how well he knew his English. It's not, you don't need to be that his level. His is a bit extreme, but you've got to be able to put a sentence together. You've got to be comfortable enough to do so, confident enough to do so, and he definitely has that kind of self-confidence, maybe ego to an extent about him to do that, but he's just never really been too much of a speaker on the mic. So perhaps after this performance, if he does put on a very good performance, then he could be, on the mic calling out guys and things like that, and that's, an interesting thing to see. Another thing that I wanted to touch upon would be, a lot of boxer cards in the past, they've done quite a few different shows at football stadiums. They've been to Barnsley in recent times for Callum Simpson, they've been to Bournemouth for Chris Billam-Smith, they've been to Crystal Palace for Richard Riakporhe, and I don't know if they really tried to do much. They tried to get Alan Azim with Slough FC, which are very much a smaller team, and they wouldn't have been able to host a boxing event, but it just didn't seem to really do much. It seemed like it was a bit of a failed attempt. It seemed like Azim didn't really like having all the people around him, didn't really get in or suit the atmosphere, and I just don't think he's bought any extra fans from doing that. And yeah, it was just another interesting thing that I wanted to pick up on. Obviously it's a personality thing as well. You don't have to be calling out all these guys. You don't have to be really putting yourself out there in a really open personality, but you if you are headlining events, you have to be able to do something to be able to provide entertainment, bar often just like his skill. Obviously his skill is excellent, but you've got to be able to do something a bit extra to be able to bring them fans in, and I'm just not sure if Azim is doing that quite as of yet. And so that's why you got to argue, and you got to look at the card and you think Callum Simpson has just recently fought. He fought just a couple of weeks back. He's now back fighting again against a bit of an unknown opponent. You kind of got to think he's a ticket seller. Perhaps they needed more tickets, and he's coming in on quite late notice. So you do have to kind of think, our Boxer just putting him in on late notice because they really don't have enough tickets sold from Azim. I don't know, but that just might be something in which I'm picking up on. But yeah, to speak a little bit, like I say, a bit more about Lipinets as a fighter, obviously he's a former world champion. He had the IBF belt back in 2017, winning it a bit against a bit of a lesser opponent, and I believe the loss versus Garcia, which was in 2018, was him losing that belt. And there's no discredit losing to Garcia. He's a four-weight world champion, I believe. Went to try fight for a fifth one against Errol Spence and lost that one. So there is no discredit for him to lose that fight. And to be fair, any of his fights in which he's lost, Lipinets, have been against very creditable opponents. I mean, obviously, like I mentioned, Garcia in the peak of his career, Ennis in the peak of his come-up of his career, and he did get stopped quite badly in that one. And Rivera coming off the loss, I believe it was against Frank Martin, he still looked excellent, and it was a bit of a close fight at times, but yeah, in general, all very creditable, like I said, opponents to lose to, and so it will be a big win if Azim is able to win. But Lipinets has also had some big wins in his career as well. Like I mentioned, Davis Jr., his last performance was one of them. Figueroa Jr. was another big win for him. Lamont Peterson as well or Peterson was another big one as well. And so yeah, he has definitely had some big wins. This is his first time in the UK fighting. It's interesting to see fighters from Kazakhstan or that kind of area a lot of the time if they make it to world level, they spend a lot of their time fighting in America, and Lipinets has been one of them. You kind of look at, somebody like Janabek as well, an excellent Kazakhstan fighter, and he's just not really kind of brought an event back to Kazakhstan, and I felt like that could sell out really well, but that just hasn't happened, and Lipinets, like I say, probably is too far in his career to really bring a big event back to Kazakhstan, but yeah, it's just interesting to see how these fighters, like I mentioned, from that kind of area are often, if they make it to a high level, able to just continuously fight in the US, and even if they lose, keep getting big matchups, and yeah, so yeah, it's just been an interesting career for Lipinets. To be fair, he's probably been moved along quicker than that of Azim. He's just been pushed quicker, and perhaps because of the maybe lesser opportunities to fight in Kazakhstan, he's had to go to America and take these tough tests, and that's kind of a thing that's quite common, to be completely honest, and it is a bit unfair because you don't see them get that same kind of development in which if you are that A-side type fighter, but it's the same with a lot of places. You see a lot of the times fighters coming from countries where perhaps there's less boxing opportunities, then they have to take the harder routes down, which, like I say, is unfair, and it can sometimes cause huge upsets and create huge names. But a lot of the time, the excellent talent doesn't get recognised the same way. And yeah, to speak about, like I say, the undercard to an extent, obviously, like I mentioned, Callum Simpson's back. that's interesting to see. He's coming off that big first round victory, which is a bit of a controversial stoppage versus Woodall, and then he's back fighting an unknown opponent really, and isn't trying to wait and fight someone like a Mark Jeffers or a Liam Cameron like he's called out. He's, I suppose, wanted to keep active, which is good. Jerry Forrest is another one as well. That's a good name to come back. I don't necessarily know how far he'll get in his career because I wasn't too impressed. He obviously got a knockout performance last time out, but I wasn't overly impressed. And Jamie TKV, another heavyweight, is coming back as well. And so he is again another fighter in which I'm not too sure how far he'll be able to go, but has got that name now and has got that boxer backing, and he's still getting matchups, so we'll have to wait and see what happens. But to speak a bit more about both Azim and Lipinets, Azim as a fighter, obviously he's got very fast hands, and he's shown that. I mean, they did that thing on Boxer where they did like a game of Snap, and Azim won, and they kind of highlighted how fast his hands is from doing that. But he does have really fast hands, very sharp, accurate, reactive type fighter, which you can often see. There's very few fighters who quite that reactive and quite that fast, especially in the development stage, and you can see the potential which he has because of that. He's got an excellent jab, and he can fight at an in close or at a mid range. I think personally he's probably best fighting at a mid range, but for the most part he, I believe, can fight in both well. He's, like I say, very sharp but very accurate, two things in which are just amazing to see, are what you're wanting for a fighter. He's very powerful at the same time and twists his body into his shots excellently. It seems like that's a very common thing for the most part for Shane McGuigan fighters. I mean, you've seen Ellie Scotney, you've seen Caroline Dubois, and we've also seen Adam Azim be just excellent at really twisting their body into their work. Not saying that every single fighter is like that, because you can't force a fighter to be like that, and if that's not their style, then that's fair enough. And so you look at somebody like a Billum Smith, that's not really his type of style. But yeah, like I say, for the most part, if you can see the effect in which Shane McGuigan has on his fighters, because you can see when they twist into their shots just how nicely that they are able to do that. Azim is patient, he feints well. For the most part, he's just out of countering range and was able to do that very well against Davies. Davies didn't really offer too much other than the wild swing at times as a counter, and for the most part he was kind of just out of range for that. He resets well, Azim. Again, that's another thing to say that I feel like Shane McGuigan fighters often do. They are able to reset very well. He listens to instructions very well as well, and is a disciplined type fighter, I believe, for the most part. He's spiteful. You can see that in his work, just how spiteful his punches, his punishing strikes are. He follows off his jab excellently. His body work is very good when he uses it. Sometimes he doesn't use it, I suppose, quite as much as what I'd like to see, but I feel like for the most part it is excellent, and he is able to cut off the ring nicely at the same time. Negatives about him: I think he can drop his lead hand, and it means he can get caught with the jab, and perhaps to an extent that's where Davies had a little bit of success, where he was able to jab because Azim was trying to throw his jab from really low down. He was getting caught with shots because that jab hand, that lead hand, was low. If he's not allowed to fight at his pace, then I think that's where the frustration possibly might happen, and he might be fighting emotionally. Like I say, he's typically very disciplined, but I don't think he's been against an opponent where he's had to really kind of deal with not being able to fight at his pace, and so it could be interesting to see at a world level if Lipinets is able to do that. And he might have fought like somebody like that in the past, Azim, but at a world level it could be a bit different. I feel like to an extent he can struggle with explosiveness a little bit at times if you are able to, catch him off guard. I feel like that can happen. On the back foot, I don't know necessarily how good he is on the back foot. Like I say, it's not something in which we have seen too much from him. His chin can be in the air a bit at times. His head movement isn't excellent. He can have excellent head movement and he can utilise it really well, but sometimes it seems like he just forgets it a little bit, and unless he's really trying to just put on a show and consciously just slip shots, then for the most part he's not really moving his head too much. Sometimes he doesn't bring his shots back enough. He doesn't throw the most shortest of shots either, so that's why I feel like perhaps he's a little bit better at a mid-range. Going for counters, I don't think he does that too much. I think he could have excellent timing if he lands more counters, but I don't necessarily know if he does go for it too much. And like I say, I feel like he's a fighter in which needs to have confidence, and if you can knock his confidence, that could be detrimental to him. Lipinets as a fighter, he improves throughout the fight. I think that's been shown in performances of his that he does improve throughout fights. He has a high guard and for the most part will remain with that high guard. It might drop down a little bit, but it is a typical type of style for him. He changes levels relatively well. When he'll go to a jab, he'll change levels. Perhaps when he is throwing a jab, he's kind of putting himself in a vulnerable position for counters because he's lunging in quite far to throw it to the body. He has got a strong jab. I don't think he forces the fight either, even if he does get you hurt. Against Davies Jr., he didn't really seem to force the fight too much, even though he did have him hurt at times. He can fight at in close range. Typically, that's where I think most of his best work is at. He walks you down. He's got them big overhands. They are quite reckless at times, but if he can land on you with them, they can hurt. And like I say, he does change levels, so then big overhands also become big body shots at the same time. He drags you into a fight, which is definitely something in which I'd like to see. O'Hara Davies just really didn't have enough to be able to do anything. He didn't look like he had that will, that desire to be able to do anything against Azim to cause many problems. But Lipinets has still, I believe, from the last performance, got some life back in him to be able to do that. So I hope that he drags him into a fight to see what happens. He fights in the pocket very well. He's a high tempo type fighter, and so he might not just accept fighting at Azim's tempo, but perhaps it might happen into the later rounds. We'll have to wait and see. He's very tough, and I think he's got very good recovery as well. To get knocked down and hurt in the earlier rounds, well, he got hurt, he got knocked down, and then he got knocked down again throughout the fight. He showed very good recovery to be able to do that. He obviously has been knocked out in the past, and against Ennis, like I say, it wasn't really a nice knockout for him to have to deal with. It wasn't a crazy bad one, but like I say, it wasn't the best of ones for him. He does typically still, I believe, able to recover well from getting hurt, even though it does seem like most fights in which he fights at a high level, he does get hurt. So we'll have to wait and see. I'm sure Azim's power could cause him problems. Negatives about Lipinets, I think his hand speed is much lesser. I think he's flat-footed. I think his reactions are much lesser. I think he stands quite tall. I think his head movement is much lesser. He does sometimes just accept shots and cover up with the tight guard. He catches quite a lot of shots. He can have quite wild swinging hooks. Like I said, not too much technique behind them, even though they would hurt if they do land. He squares up a bit. His mid-range accuracy is quite poor, and so quite often when he's struggling with the mid-range, he'll go into to an extent a little bit of a Mike Tyson's type style, where he's covering up with a high tight guard and just trying to slip back and forth and kind of go to the body, and sometimes that's where he does some really good work. But yeah, like I say, if he can't get past you, even when he's doing that, then his mid-range accuracy can be poor. He can be hit to the body quite a lot and can be hurt to the body, so I'm sure Azim will be looking for that. I think he can lean his head back a bit at times as well. He can walk onto shots, he can keep you on the ropes, but well, not too well. He can keep on the ropes a bit if he's hurting you, but you are able to kind of circle off the ropes a bit versus him. He can be outthrown, and of course, like I said, he has been hurt quite consistently. Azim is the favourite for this fight, and I think that Azim's going to be able to win via TKO in round 9. I would love personally to see Azim get dragged into a fight just to see how he can deal with it. I personally think Lipinets possibly could do that at times, but I also think Azim's speed again, reactions again. I want to see how good his work rate is, and I felt like this fight might be able to test that. Hopefully it goes into the later rounds and is set at a high tempo. But like I say, I want to see the speed, the reactions still. Lipinets, like I say, putting Azim on the back foot. I think Azim's footwork probably would be good enough to get off the ropes against Lipinets. I think you have the power to hurt him. If Lipinets keeps walking forward quite flat-footed, then he can take quite a lot of punishment from Azim. And if he can get through the onslaught from Lipinets, as Ennis showed, you can hurt Lipinets, and I think Azim will do that and will win, like I say, via that late kind of stoppage time, via TKO in round 9. Then who we could go on to fight next? Like I mentioned, some names in which I spoke about. Dalton Smith would be an excellent name to have, but perhaps they don't really want to go alongside each other. Dalton Smith kind of didn't even mention Azim's name and kind of went down that route of a world title shot, but that could be a great eliminator for a world title. Eubank, that's still a name in which I personally like to see. Could that happen? I'm not too sure, but you never know. And he has a McKenna fight he has to get through, but maybe. O'Leary, again, another name that's in the division that I forgot to mention. That could be a great fight to make as well. I think Claglet could be a bit more of a realistic name. He's coming off, I don't think he's fought since the loss versus Teofimo Lopez, I might be wrong, but he's still, again, another highly world ranked name. And like I mentioned at the start of the video, they normally probably go for a couple before they actually get to a world ranked opponent, whether that be a final eliminator, an interim fight, or a world title. They normally fight a couple gatekeeper world level type fighters, and Claglet could be that. But yeah, we will have to wait and see. Hope you did enjoy though. Like the video. If you didn't like the video, subscribe if you're new. And thanks for watching.